crazy American conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. A couple weeks ago, I made a video about the craziest conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. And in that video, it was kind of concerning how many of these crazy conspiracies were either involving or done by the United States government. And in that video, I said if there was interest, I would make a video specifically focusing on conspiracy theories that involved the US government. And overwhelmingly, you guys demanded that video. And against my better judgment, I made it. So in this video, we're discussing crazy conspiracies that involve the US government. Let's begin. The Tuskegee study. There's a saying that goes, if something is free, then you're probably the product. And that is something that holds very true when it comes to the Tuskegee study. The Tuskegee study was a very disturbing and deceptive study that took place in Tuskegee, Alabama. The study specifically targeted black males and how having an untreated disease would affect them. If you're curious about what that disease may be, then perhaps the other name for this study may lend a hint. The Tuskegee study is also known as the Tuskegee syphilis study. Yeah. This study initially took place from 1929 to 1931 and had relatively innocent intentions. During this time, the Rosen World Fund, a fund that essentially promoted healthcare and education to poor African American farmers, specifically about sexually transmitted diseases. The goal of this initial study was to identify the southern counties in Alabama with the highest rates of syphilis among African American males. At this time, the goal was to simply find this location and find the people within this location that had syphilis and then treat them. Still seeming relatively innocent. This pursuit was successful, and they found that Macon County in Alabama had the highest rate of male syphilis, with over 35% of men being infected with syphilis. Although, near the end of 1931 is where this all takes a very dark turn, as during this time, the Great Depression was in full swing, and the Rosenwald Fund, which was looking to help the poor African-American community, was running out of funding. It was at this point when the Public Health Service, a part of the United States government, approached the Tuskegee Institute in Tuskegee, Alabama, to see if they would be willing to continue the study, specifically researching the effects of untreated syphilis in African American males. But they only proposed that they monitor these untreated people for 6 to 9 months to gather data and then at that point treat them fully. Remember this timeline, because we'll be referencing this later. The Tuskegee Institute agreed to do this research as they thought it was beneficial, not only for their local population, but for all Americans. And it was shortly after, in 1932, when the study began. The study began with 600 men being enrolled into the study. 399 of these men had syphilis, 201 of these men did not. Things already take a dark turn here, as all 600 of these men were more or less kept in the dark about what this study exactly was about, and they were really only being told that they were getting free healthcare, something that was hard to come by and an appetizing offer for anybody suffering from any sort of disease. Right? Not only did the government say that they were going to give them free healthcare, they also said that they were going to treat these men of their bad blood, which isn't really a medical condition. It was more or less of a local blanket term that just described general illness. Most of them weren't even necessarily diseases themselves, but symptoms, such as fatigue, body pains, anemia, and even undiagnosed syphilis symptoms as well. These 600 men were specifically promised free medical exams, meals covered by the government, and even burial insurance in case they died during the study. That alone should have seemed like a red flag, but at this time it seemed like a deal that was too good to be true, which is potentially another red flag. So consider that 2 red flags. But back to the point. For the men in this study who were confirmed to have syphilis, the government didn't tell them about their diagnosis, and they didn't even give them any treatment either. Now, at this point, you might be asking, why didn't the government simply find people that they knew had syphilis and then simply request that they have the ability to monitor them? These people already had syphilis, and the US government was willing to incentivize them, so why not inform them about the data that you're collecting? The government claimed they took a deceptive path because it was the only way that these men would have stayed in the study, and for the study to work, they needed to be closely monitored consistently over time. But it's heavily suspected that this deception was based on a lack of respect, both because of racial and economic prejudice, specifically because the study only involved black men, all of which who were poor farmers, which meant they had limited resources and almost no education as well too. And by limited education, I mean very limited, like fully illiterate. So if you're an educated and prejudiced doctor during this time, why would you give these people any real information? Just keep them in the dark. They don't know any better, right? That doesn't sound ethical to me, but I suppose that was their mindset. So at this point, you may be thinking, sure, okay, the US government wasn't fully upfront and maybe wasn't even respectful to these people that they were studying, but so what? It's not like they gave these people syphilis. These people had syphilis. All they were doing was collecting data. And while I personally would say that there is a ton of ethical issues within that already, that is not the worst part about this study. That is only the beginning of this study. After the initial 9 months that this study was supposed to go on, they decided to extend the study. and extended again. And in 1934, the first major paper about the study of untreated syphilis was made public. And if you're thinking that now that there's a paper and they can end the study and finally treat these men, you're unfortunately mistaken. And it was at this point when the study was extended once again. And there was even a push from the medical community not to treat these men, but to actually prevent these men from getting treatment so they could see the prolonged effects of syphilis. And this is where we get to the darkest part of this study. The study actually went on for 40 years. And for a majority of that 40-year period, there was actually an extremely effective and safe treatment available. That being penicillin, which was first used to treat infections in 1930, and by 1945, it was accepted as a proper treatment for syphilis. But of course, these men were kept in the dark about that, and were never offered it or even informed about it. And the government simply just decided to watch these men wither away, to see how this infection affected daily life over an extremely long period of time. By the end of the study, it was estimated that 128 of the men in the study died directly from the syphilis that they had. 40 of the men in this study also infected their wives, and 19 of these men had children that were born with syphilis. Those numbers especially are extremely disheartening because those people didn't even sign up for this deceptive study. They were simply the unintentional victim of the unintentional victim. And a lot of these deaths and infections could have easily been prevented by treating these people like they planned on doing. But instead, they decided to simply withhold treatment and monitor them for 40 years. Something that I think any reasonable person would agree is unethical and honestly horrible. Medical studies require consent, and the patients in the study need to be fully informed of the risks and also treatments available, and they need to be treated with respect. And with the Tuskegee study, none of those measures were taken, and it's truly a dark and shameful part of American medical history. But there is a silver lining to this story, as on July 25th, 1972, a journalist named Jean Heller broke the story about the horrific study that had been going on for the last 40 years. And with this news breaking, the government then decided that this study was ethically unjustified, and that also meant that it was immediately canceled. And the following year, there was actually a class action lawsuit that was filed on behalf of these men who were unknowingly a part of the study, and they did end up winning $9.5 million in 1973 money. So keep in mind, it's adjusted for inflation, it's around $50 million today. I'm sure for some, this money was extremely helpful and went a long way, but many of the participants never even knew that they were part of a study, never saw this money, and simply died because they didn't know what they signed up for. And even if you did live to get part of this settlement, not only is your body worse for wear for never getting treatment for a disease that they knew you had, but you also likely have no trust in the government, as they just spent the last 40 years treating you like a lab rat, and the few dollars that they were forced to throw at you only feels like too little too late. So yeah, the Tuskegee study started by simply trying to identify counties with the highest syphilis population to begin treatment, and ended with a 40-year study that completely violated not only the human rights of the participants, or should I say victims, but also the medical system as a whole. And as upsetting and disturbing as this story is, at least there was some sort of closure associated with it. This is only the first entry on this list, and we have lots more to cover. The Watergate scandal. When I first heard the name of this conspiracy theory or situation, I was convinced that it had something to do with the US government putting something in the water. But as you may know, that's not the case at all. And interestingly, this scandal is also the reason why a lot of other scandals have gate in their name, such as Deflategate, Elsagate, and a lot of other scandals that range from morbid to disturbing. So let's give a bit of context before we get into the details of this Watergate. Richard Nixon was the 37th president of the United States. He was an author, a lawyer, and a career politician. But in 1974, his presidency was cut short as he resigned for reasons that involve the Watergate scandal. This entire scandal is interesting and kind of two-sided because there is the initial acts that took place, and then there is the reaction to the exposure of the initial actions. And if you're already confused, don't worry, because I'm going to lay it out simply as possible. This entire situation begins with Richard Nixon being paranoid that he was not going to win a re-election, something that he feared deeply and was willing to do anything to avoid. This included harassing opposing journalists, politicians, and even celebrities who could potentially influence his re-election in a negative way. And he and his administration would harass them by abusing government power in ways such as auditing them and even getting them involved in strange legal disputes and more. But that's only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the situation. Prior to the 1972 election, the election that Nixon was so fearful of losing, a group of Nixon's associated formed the Creeps. Creeps meaning the Committee to Re-elect the President. An odd and kind of fitting name. This rather elusive group went to some extreme and even illegal measures to ensure that their goal was met. One of their biggest efforts was collecting information on the opposing party, the Democratic Party. And this is where we get to Watergate. This group of creeps were approved to break into and plant listening devices into the Democratic National Committee headquarters, which just so happened to be based in the Watergate office building in Washington, D.C. The group figured that if they could break into their offices and collect data secretly, they could find some dirt and use it against them to make sure that they win the 1972 election. The first time these creeps broke into the office, the mission was successful. However, on their second attempt, all 5 of these men were caught. And this is where the plot thickens. Because nobody knew who these men were, what their motivation was, and what their goal was. All they knew is that there was 5 spies breaking into the Democratic Party's headquarters. Although it's not hard to think of who may have potentially ordered this attack. The FBI began to look deeply into this case to find who exactly was involved and what their motivation and goal was. It was at this point, coincidentally, when Richard Nixon would instruct the CIA to tell the FBI to halt all further investigation on this entire scandal, or at least the finances involved behind the scandal. They were still going to investigate these men, but the funding investigation was blocked. Obviously, this entire situation sparked public outrage, and there was a lot of finger pointing at the Republican Party, specifically at the president himself. And although he and his party strictly denied any involvement or awareness of this essentially spy operation, information was flowing in and the house of cards was crumbling. One of the early pieces of evidence that pointed towards Nixon was the fact that one of these men who conducted this robbery was actually a Republican aide. And on top of that, they had an informant who was feeding them information directly connecting these burglars to Richard Nixon himself. And I swear I'm not even making it up. This informant or whistleblower went by the alias of Deep Throat. Shout out Deep Throat for the information. I feel like if you called the government right now and told them you had information, but you wanted to go by the name Deep Throat, you'd probably get hung up on, but that's just me. Now, despite all of this media attention and this obviously odd situation going on, Nixon did obviously win the election in 1972. However, that was short-lived. The following year in 1973, 4 of Nixon's top aides lost their job because they were involved directly in the cover-up. Through months and months of consistent investigations, there was only more and more dots being connected and lines being drawn directly back to Richard Nixon from these burglars and from this entire scandal. And while everything was still relatively unconfirmed, it became more and more plausible that Richard Nixon not only knew about this situation, but was also directly involved. And it was at this point as well when Richard Nixon's own assistant broke the news that Richard Nixon had installed spy devices all around the White House. And while his intentions aren't fully known, I would assume he did this to benefit himself. And unfortunately for him, these recording devices actually became his downfall, as they were able to prove his involvement. When Nixon's assistant broke the news in court that these devices were installed, the government instantly subpoenaed these devices to hear the recordings that he had captured. And of course, Nixon honored the subpoena and handed over these recording devices, right? No, obviously not. He not only denied to hand them over, but he also exercised an executive privilege, stating that the president should have some right to privacy, which obviously isn't what this was about at all. Eventually, these tapes were handed over, and after thoroughly being reviewed, it was confirmed that Richard Nixon knew exactly what was going on and was even providing hush money to these creeps. The president had 2 options: resign or be impeached. And as we know, on August 8th, 1974, he resigned as the United States president. This entire situation put people in jail, changed laws, and also changed US politics forever, as it was the first ever resignation of a president in the history of the United States. This conspiracy or scandal may not seem extremely shocking at this point, because I feel like nowadays trust in the government is at an all-time low, but that wasn't always the case. And there was a point in time when people had trust and respect for the powers that be and believed that they had integrity. This situation is undeniably bad, as it's a blatant abuse of power and is a demonstration of a president fighting dirty for his own gain. And while justice was served and there was a happy ending to this story, the situation really only exposed likely something that was already going on. So yeah, the president wanted to maintain his power, did some shady things to collect some information to win the presidency, but what's considered worst of all is the fact that he not only denied and lied about the situation, but also used executive orders to prevent the truth from being revealed. Regardless, people in these high positions of power should be held to a high standard, and integrity and honesty should come first. And I hope someday we can return to that. But yeah, let's keep going. Project MKUltra. MKUltra is one of the most notorious and disturbing covert operations in all of US history. And it's for that reason that I'm going to keep this section pretty brief and try my best to make sure that I really only focus on information that you may not have heard yet if you're already familiar. This entire conspiracy theory had one single goal: to explore the methods of mind control and behavioral manipulation in humans. The reason this operation even started was because after the Korean War, American prisoners of war who were being returned home seemed to have been brainwashed, as they were consistently repeating what they believed to be communist propaganda. To the American government, this was very concerning because they assumed this had to be the result of brainwashing from their communist opposition, which meant that if these communists had mind control techniques that the Americans didn't, then they had an advantage over America. And obviously this meant that they needed to develop their own mind control techniques, or at least explore how they would go about it. Already, we're on a pretty disturbing note, but this really does only get worse from here. It was after this discovery when the CIA, which was relatively new at the time, was given $25 million to perform psychiatric experiments on humans. At the time, this was the most hidden and secretive project that the CIA and the US government as a whole was performing. And it'll become pretty obvious why when we get into the details. The government was finding patients at psychiatric hospitals, prisoners from federal prisons, and even random members of the public. And what they would do is dose them with drugs without their awareness and then do experiments on them to see how the drugs affected them. One of the most interesting and notable operations in MKUltra was an operation known as Operation Midnight Climax, which has an oddly fitting name and essentially consisted of the US government building safe houses. And what these safe houses were essentially fake plant houses where US government funded prostitutes would lure men into these houses and then dose them with LSD where they were being observed, typically behind a two-way mirror in that very safe house. In the last section, we talked about creeps in the government, but this brings it to a whole nother level. Not only were they paying prostitutes to lure men to essentially trapped houses, they would also dose them with drugs without their consent and experiment on them. But that's still only the tip of the iceberg. Another interesting thing that they did was hosting LSD parties, which was essentially a party where music was played and LSD was unknowingly given to the participants of this party. And these scientists would simply observe these people on LSD to see how they would react. And it's believed that these ongoing tests were actually a precursor to the hippie movement, or at least part of it, which is interesting. But MKUltra wasn't just prostitutes and partying. There was a lot of medical mismanagement, most famously at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada, where patients with relatively minor ailments would be taken advantage of and experimented on with aggressive drug cocktails. The main doctor at this institute, known as Dr. Cameron, pursued a concept that he called depatterning, and this concept and practice was truly evil. The goal of this practice was to reduce patients to an infantile psychological state, essentially giving an adult the mind of a child. And the point of bringing people to the state was so that the government could take advantage of this extremely vulnerable position and from that point rebuild their mind, giving them an entirely new psyche, thought process, mindset, and belief system to essentially control this person fully. Besides dosing these people with drugs, they would also put these people into comas and play messages over and over again until they sunk deep into the person's subconscious. And they even performed electroshock therapy and other forms of extreme therapy on these people as well. Disturbingly, this entire project went on for 20 years, from 1953 to 1973. And while it's not known the true number of people that were unknowingly experimented on by the US government in this 20-year period, it's likely safe to assume that there was hundreds, if not thousands, of victims of this disturbing study, many of which who were simply never the same, for reasons that they would never understand why. If you're experienced with drugs, then you likely understand how bad it is to have a bad trip, and you likely understand how detrimental it could be for someone who's never had a psychedelic experience to have an unknowing dose put upon them. That experience, for many, is likely completely mind-altering and also extremely terrifying, and it's quite disturbing how many people this had happened to. Although, once again, there is some sort of happy ending, I suppose, as in 1973, the operation was closed, once again by a whistleblower, although this time the whistleblower's name wasn't Deep Throat. His name was actually 69 Lord. I'm just joking. His name was John Marks, and he wrote a book named The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, where he exposed most of the operation. And at that point, after this information had been exposed, congressional hearings began to investigate what was really going on. And it was through those hearings where the CIA not only admitted that the operation existed, but they also were forced to admit what they were doing. To this day, there has been no class action lawsuit, no apology, nothing. And the children of some of these victims are still pursuing legal action against the institutes that they deem responsible. And personally, I hope justice is truly served, as awareness and exposure is one thing, but justice goes beyond just that. It's so ironic that after the Korean War, the US government publicly exposed and shamed these communist countries for their mind control techniques and how they could possibly brainwash prisoners of war and torture them. But almost immediately after giving a speech about how horrible these things are, they then begin not only researching their own methods of doing the exact same thing, but they go about it in likely the worst way possible. And Project MKUltra is a massive example of the US government breaking moral, ethical, and legal laws in their own self-interest, and it's one that people have not forgotten, nor should they ever. What do you guys think? Feel free to let me know in the comments. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video was made because of your overwhelming interest and support in the comments of the last video. So I just quickly wanted to make the same offer again. If you guys liked this video and would like me to make a part 2 about crazy conspiracies that the US government has been involved in, then please leave a comment telling me that you want part 2. I try to read as many comments as possible and I take your guys' suggestions seriously. So yeah, I thought I'd just mention that quickly. But without further ado, let's get to the last entry of this list: the Iran-Contra affair. The US is still very much in a Cold War against Russia, and is still very much so anti-communist. And it was at this time when the president, Ronald Reagan, promised to support anti-communist insurgencies around the world. Meaning that if you were a country that was currently dealing with a potential rise in communism or the threat of communism, the US had your back to make sure that that wasn't a problem. Typically by providing arms, or at the very least, training. Reagan was particularly interested in a group known as the Contras, and this group was at war with another group within Nicaragua, known as the Sandinistas. The biggest difference between these two groups was the fact that the Sandinistas was a communist group, and they were backed by Cuba. The president, Ronald Reagan, saw the Contras as a noble force, and even equated them to being similar to the founding fathers as they were fighting for freedom. Now this is where things begin to get sticky. The Contras were funding their war primarily through the drug trade, and because of this, the American government actually passed an amendment known as the Boland Amendment, preventing the US government from providing the Contras with any support due to their involvement in the drug trade. So far, this is pretty straightforward and seems reasonable enough. However, it was at this point when Ronald Reagan decided that he didn't want to follow this amendment and continued to support the Contras regardless of the amendment. And how they did this is a bit confusing, as where they went next was Iran. At the time, in 1985, Iran had 7 American hostages that they were keeping in Lebanon, and Reagan wanted to do everything he could to make sure that these hostages came home alive. It was at this point when the government made a deal. The US government, with Reagan's approval, agreed to give Iran weapons in exchange for the release of the hostages. It's important to note that this was all happening behind closed doors, because publicly, Reagan was saying that he would not negotiate with terrorists, and there was even a trade embargo currently going on with Iran at the time. But that's still only where things begin, as the US government technically budgeted $30 million to go to Iran for this terrorist negotiation, although it was shortly after exposed that only $12 million of this $30 million actually went to Iran, and the remaining $18 million actually went to support the Contras, a group that the US government was not allowed to support. This is a bit of a double whammy, because not only was the government negotiating with terrorists, something that they said they would not be doing, but they were also supporting a group that they were not allowed to support. And this was all exposed by a Lebanese journalist in 1986. And the fallout of this is where we truly see the impact of the entire situation. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, who was in charge of most of these operations, came clean about his involvement and said that he knew it happened, he was part of it, and he also admitted that Reagan knew about all of it. This testimony from the colonel and pressure from journalists caused investigations to be launched against Reagan, not just at the time, but for the entirety of his presidency from that point on. And after these investigations, it was ruled that Reagan's involvement was more or less benign and was simply due to a lack of oversight, and because of this, he was not implicated directly, meaning he wasn't in trouble. At least until 1987, when Reagan finally testified on this entire matter. And while these hearings went on for 41 days and were publicly televised, Reagan would still not face any consequences. However, that wasn't the case for everybody. 12 people involved in this conspiracy were charged and found guilty. Those people being Robert McFarlane, Colonel Oliver North, 4 CIA officers, 5 government contractors, and Reagan's national security advisor, John Poindexter. Undoubtedly, this entire situation stained Reagan's image as a president and as an honest man. However, surprisingly, he was never impeached, never resigned, and actually left office with one of the highest approval ratings in US history, which to me either seems that people were uninformed about the situation or simply agreed with what happened, although it wasn't legal. Not only did it expose a level of distrust for the government, like in Watergate, but it also resulted in the US government literally giving an opposing terrorist organization $12 million out of a hypothetical $30 million that was supposed to be given to them, which I think a lot of people would consider to be a conflict of interest. And while obviously getting hostages home is important, giving them a proposed $30 million of weaponry seems a bit counterintuitive. Combine that to secretly funneling money to an organization that is currently trying to overthrow the Nicaraguan government that is funded by the drug trade, that's an entirely different can of worms as well too. And whether or not you think these actions were justified or moral, that's a decision that you have to make for yourself. But the point is the fact that the government was lying directly to the face of the people and doing things that they likely would have not voted towards or supported, which some would consider to be unlawful, unmoral, and unethical. And if the person you're supposed to trust is saying one thing to your face and then behind closed doors doing essentially the exact opposite, it's not a good look for the trust and faith in the institution that you're running. And I suppose with that, I do want to make a quick point that although this video is focusing on negative things that the US government has done and been involved with, I don't want you leaving this video with a huge doom and gloom mentality. And I think it's important to note that the government is simply a group of people, and people are dumb for the most part and self-interested. And for that reason, the government is going to reflect the people that it's made up of. That doesn't excuse them of any of its responsibility, although it's important to note that the government isn't this otherworldly thing that is perfect. It's really not. It's literally just people. And ideally, we'd have great people in there looking out for other people, but obviously that's not always the case. But with that being said, I think the point of this video and the mindset I'd like you to leave this video with is not to say that the US government or any particular government is evil and horrible and out to get you. I think it's important to note and be aware of times where the government or any institution has done horrible things, be aware of them, hold them accountable, and also do everything in our power to learn from them and prevent them from ever happening again. And the more things that we're able to expose and have out in the open, the more we're going to be able to see the signs in the future and prevent further negative things from happening. But maybe I'm just too optimistic. Let me know what you guys think. I want to say thank you guys so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video about true American conspiracy theories and scandals, then I think you'd probably like this video on screen right now. It's a video I posted last week about the most wanted drug lords in America right now, where I detail every entry currently on the DEA's most wanted list. And I'll just tell you right now, this is a pretty insane group of criminals, and I think you're gonna like that video. And in case you haven't seen it, I also made another video about conspiracy theories, and I'll put that one in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, trust me, bro. The scariest mythical creatures that probably existed. That is exactly what we're going to be talking about today, and this list is spooky. If you're new here, this is actually the third video in my scariest mythical creatures series, but you don't need to have watched those videos to understand this video. Each of my mythical creatures videos is a new list, and just like the other list, this list starts scary and gets even scarier as the video goes on, and all of these creatures are from different parts of the world. Let's begin. Starting off in the birthplace of freedom, we have Mothman from the US of A. Mothman is one of the most recently discovered creatures on this list, with his story only originating in 1966, relatively recently compared to some of the entries on this list. Mothman was first spotted in the small town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, but his legend has grown immensely over the years. Early witnesses described Mothman as a large black creature with glowing red eyes, 7 to 10 feet tall and muscular. They claimed it appeared bird-like in nature, but was much too big to be a bird. Something interesting about the Mothman lore is that sightings really only took place from November 15th, 1966 to December 15th, 1967, meaning that there was only about 13 months of sightings. December 15th is actually a pretty significant date when it comes to Point Pleasant history. It was the date of a rather tragic event. The Silver Bridge, also known as the Point Pleasant Bridge, a bridge that connected West Virginia and Ohio, collapsed. Not only did it collapse, but it collapsed during rush hour traffic. This resulted in the death of 46 people and the permanent loss of 2 bodies. Now, why am I bringing up the Silver Bridge incident? Well, it's because in 1975, the book by John Keel, The Mothman Prophecies, claimed that not only was there paranormal events related to the sightings, but that there was also a connection to Mothman and the collapse of the bridge. To me, that's a pretty serious claim. During the 13 months of active Mothman sightings, there was hundreds, and later on it was revealed that there was over 100 people that were too scared to even admit that they saw the Mothman. With that being said, I put Mothman as number 1 on the list because I believe that he is definitely scary, but his intentions are too unknown to be truly evil. Although some things have been attributed to him, the only real claims that can be made against him is that he was standing there menacingly, and also the fact that he would potentially bang on the roofs of teenagers' cars. If you've seen any of our other videos, you know that these are extremely tame actions for a mythical creature, and I also believe that the Mothman could have very well existed simply because of all of the evidence there is and how passionate the Point Pleasant community is. This city has a big sculpture of the Mothman in its downtown. Like, this is the one thing to happen in Point Pleasant, and they are not living it down. My personal thoughts on the matter are that since he was only seen for a short amount of time, I think it's very possible that this could have been someone playing an elaborate prank or trying to be a superhero for a short amount of time until they got bored of it. But even if Mothman is some sort of supernatural being, I believe the scariest thing about him is his appearance. And for that reason, he is only number 1 on the list. And like I mentioned earlier, this video gets scarier as we go on. So let's move on. Second, we have Nixie. The Nixie stems from Scandinavian and German origins. These creatures almost always depict a human female, but they can vary from looking like an old woman with green teeth, skin, and hair to looking like a beautiful woman with green teeth, skin, and hair. They are also often covered in moss, seaweed, and seashells. Although Nixies are sometimes described as having a fish tail in the water, they can appear on land in full humanoid form. But one tell that always gives them away is that their clothes are always slightly damp and dripping water. Nixies are commonly described as nymphs or water sprites or even mermaids, and all of which are technically correct, but I believe that most people would probably identify what I've already described as a mermaid. The one thing that makes the Nixie rather unique is the fact that the lore is much older and dates way further back, and also their unique abilities. Some traits that the Nixie shares with mermaids is their infatuation with humans and their beauty and songs used to seduce sailors, typically into danger. But that isn't always the case. Some Nixies require an annual human sacrifice. Some Nixies have a lust for humans, which has a romantic and not deadly ending, which I won't get into any further detail, but you can imagine. Nixies also have the unique ability to control the weather if irritated. With all of this being said, I think the Nixies are very interesting and infatuating, but I definitely think they are scarier than Mothman for the simple reason that they have more malice intent. Typically, not always, but typically. Whereas with Mothman, we have no reported deaths or requirements of sacrifice. He's not a sexy green lady, but he's also not necessarily trying to drown you. So I feel like for that reason, the Nixie is a little bit scarier, but not quite as scary as our next entry from Down Under. I'm of course talking about the Bunyip, not the Bunyin. That's something else. The Bunyip. Originating from Aboriginal mythology of southeastern Australia, the Bunyip is described as an amphibious creature lurking in waterbeds, swamps, creeks, and other watery places. Although physical descriptions of the Bunyip vary drastically, the most common descriptions typically include a round head, an elongated neck, and the body resembling an ox or a hippopotamus or even a manatee. The Bunyip has also been reported to make roaring or booming noises. The Bunyip inhabits and protects these shallow waters and preys upon anyone who dares go near them. One thing that I find pretty ironic is that the Bunyip sometimes is described as having glowing red eyes and also drowning people. So if you really think about it, it's kind of a combination of Mothman and Nixie, the best of both worlds. Or the worst, I guess. The story of the Bunyip and different accounts and drawings have existed for hundreds of years, adding a lot to its validity of its actual history. And although it's never been proven to exist, there are many that would argue the Bunyip is very real. That, combined with the fact that the Bunyip is definitely the most violent creature so far on the list, I'd have to give it the number 3 spot. Any huge creature with huge claws, glowing red eyes, chilling in the water, just waiting to rip you to shreds is pretty scary in my book. The Bunyip is terrifying, and who knows? It might just be real too, but let's hope not. Next up, we have what may be the silliest little guy on the entire list. We have the Tokoloshe, or the Tikalosh from South Africa. Physically, the Tokoloshe resembles a dwarf-like or even goblin-like water spirit. It is a mischievous and evil spirit that can become invisible by only drinking water or swallowing a stone, which is weird. Could you just imagine like 2 Tokoloshes? It's like their time to go be mischievous, and one of them's like, hey, let's go invisible, let's go drink water, and the other guy's just like, no, I think I'm gonna swallow the stone. And the other guy's like, are you sure? We could just drink this water. And he's like, no, I like swallowing the stone. I guess no one said they were normal. I know I've kept this segment light so far, but the true reality of the Tokoloshe is rather dark. The Tokoloshe's sole purpose is to cause humans harm and discomfort at the very least. At its least harmful, a Tokoloshe can be used to scare children, but its true power can be used to cause illness and even death to its victim. Now, if you caught what I said there, you might be questioning, what do you mean they can be used by? Who's using the Tokoloshes? Well, Tokoloshes are called upon by malevolent people used to cause trouble to others. These goblin-like creatures are essentially people's henchmen to do their dirty work. These malevolent people are typically witches, focusing specifically on dark magic. And whatever jobs these witches task these Tokoloshes with, they will do until completion. And during the night, they will execute their plan. A really interesting part about Tokoloshe lore is how commonly it's been used in legal situations in South Africa, specifically as a scapegoat for robbery, assault, and murder. I don't know about you, but a short, green, powerful being that could be invisible, appearing in your house in the night that can cause you anything from a slight discomfort to death sounds pretty scary to me. And the fact that there's not only just headlines, but court cases involving the Tokoloshe as the suspect is the reason why it's included on this list on creatures that probably existed. The biggest reason why I put the Tokoloshe above the bunyip is the simple fact that the bunyip can simply be avoided by not going to a swamp at night. The Tokoloshe is something that if it's set on you, you're not escaping. And your only real hope is that its intention is just something mischievous and not worse. But it gets worse with our next entry, El Silbón, or the Whistler. El Silbón is a Colombian and Venezuelan folklore creature who might have the worst backstory we've heard yet. The legend states that El Silbón started as a young boy who was a spoiled brat whose parents catered to his every wish. One night he demanded his father hunt him a deer as it was his favorite meat, but his father didn't return home that night with the deer. The son killed his father and cut out his organs. He gave these organs to his mother to cook for dinner. His mother cooked them, and as they ate them, she realized the meat tasted off. She began to ask where her husband was, and she soon put the dots together. Obviously, she was shocked, and things did not go well. The mother cursed her son for eternity, and afterwards his grandfather had ordered him to be tied up to a post in the middle of the countryside. He lashed his back open until his back was destroyed. The grandfather placed alcohol, chili peppers, and lemon juice in his wounds, and then he put his father's organs in a bag and placed it on the boy's back. The grandfather released 2 rabid dogs upon him, but before he released the dog, the grandfather condemned the boy to carry the bag of his father's remains for eternity. From that point on, the boy was now El Silbón, a 3 to 6 meter tall, skeleton-like creature with a bag of bones on its back, with a bloodlust and a vengeance. Why do they call him El Silbón, or the Whistler? It's because he whistles a very specific tune with the musical notes C, D, E, F, G, A, and then B in that order. It is said that if you hear this tone, it is a sign of your death. They say if you hear the whistle close to you, your death is far away. But they say if the whistle is in the distance and faint, your death is closer than you think. The Whistler is typically known to target drunks and womanizers, but it's not uncommon for him to target innocent victims as well. The Whistler uses the element of surprise and typically jumps out of trees. He rips his victims to shreds and adds their bones and remains to the bag on his back, forever carrying all of his victims with him. I don't know about you, but if I heard a very faint whistle and looked around and then saw a 3 meter tall skeleton-like creature jump out of a tree and rip my bones out, I wouldn't be too happy about it. You might think this story is a bit over the top, but if you talk to any resident of the Los Llanos region of the East Andes in Colombia and Venezuela, I think you'd hear some convincing stories. Kuchi Sake Ona, the slit-mouth woman. That is the second last entry on this list, and one of the most terrifying by far. The slit-mouth woman is a malevolent figure from Japanese folklore. She is described as a malicious spirit in the form of a woman with long, straight black hair, pale skin, and scissors or some sort of sharp object in her hand. She is otherwise beautiful, but if she removes her mask, you might change your opinion. Encounters with the slit-mouth woman are simple but gruesome and go something like this. You see her and she stops you in your tracks and asks you, "Am I pretty?" If you say no, she'll instantly kill you with the sharp object she has. Now, if you do say she's beautiful, she'll remove her mask, exposing her horribly disfigured and scarred mouth, and ask you, "How about now?" If you tell her no, she will use the sharp object to kill you. But if you agree that she is still beautiful, she'll only disfigure your face to look like hers. Some believe the split-mouth woman is a victim of violence and only seeking vengeance. Others believe that she is a yokai and this is her natural form. If the death and face mutilation wasn't scary enough to justify her position on the list, consider this. This is the only mythical creature that requires you to talk to a woman. And if that's not scary, I don't know what is. Now, we've finally made it to the last entry on this list. This is one of the most requested creatures by far ever since I released my first video, which if you haven't seen, watch it after this. Keep in mind, this is only the third installment. This is an ongoing series on the channel, and if you want to see more creatures, please comment them below. I want to make as many videos as you guys want to watch. Now, with that being said, let's get into our final creature. Not actually into it, unless that's what you're into. Regardless, our final entry is, and I can already feel some of you guys losing it right now because I'm finally talking about it. It's the Manananggal. Everybody who commented this on all of my videos must have been on a mission to give me nightmares, because this is by far, almost inarguably, the scariest mythical creature of all time. At least it's gotta be up there. It's definitely the scariest one that I've covered so far. If you're from the Philippines, you know what I'm gonna be talking about. But if you're not, let me just give you a sample of the Manananggal. As you could have guessed, the Manananggal is a Filipino creature. And believe it or not, that's not the scariest part. I'm joking. The Manananggal has large, bat-like wings, a long, thin tongue, vampire-like teeth, and werewolf-like claws. Also, it's not wearing pants. Why? Because it doesn't have a bottom half. The Manananggal's organs and innards are simply dangling from below itself. To be fair, it does have a bottom half. It can just remove it at any time. During the day, the Manananggal are said to be beautiful women who live normal lives that can even be married or in relationships. But at night, they show their true form. Their arms turn into their wings, and they separate their torso from their legs, leaving their organs hanging as they fly through the night sky. They prey on sleeping people, and their favorite victim are pregnant women. They insert their long tongue into their victim, and in the case of pregnant women, they eat the fetus. And in the case of men, they eat their organs and drink their blood. Now, I don't think there's necessarily a question of why the Manananggal is so terrifying and disgusting. But you may be thinking, is this really something that probably existed? Well, let me offer this. Scholars claimed that there are architectural elements changed by the fear of the Manananggal, specifically in rural regions. Two primary changes include slanted roofs to prevent the Manananggal from landing on it, and strategically placed windows away from bedrooms for reasons you can probably assume. I always love reading the comments you guys leave, and I always love researching the creatures that I end up putting on these lists. If there's a creature that I missed, or if there's some details I missed, please comment them below. Now, keep in mind, these videos are just for fun, and if something sounds a little bit off, just trust me, bro. I appreciate you guys for watching, and until next time, trust me, bro.
Every person currently on the FBI's most wanted list. This is the FBI's 10 most wanted list. It is a rotating list of fugitives that are so wanted by the government that they are literally asking the public for help and offering major cash rewards. When I did a deep dive on the most wanted list a year ago, you guys loved it. And today, I'm going to be doing an updated version of the list. Not only am I going to explain in detail who is currently on the list and why, but I am also going to give updates about everybody who was on the list in my last video and what happened to them today. Now, let's begin. Fausto Isidro Meza Flores. Fausto was born on June 19th, 1982 in Mexico. He is 43 years old, he has dark hair, brown eyes, weighs approximately 160 pounds, and is 5'6". And Fausto is also known as El Chapo Isidro. Fausto is one of the most recent additions to the FBI's most wanted list, being added only on February 4th, 2025. Although this individual is no stranger to crime and has a long history of criminal activity. Fausto is accused of spending the last 20 years flooding the United States with drugs that are extremely deadly and dangerous to society. This list includes fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, and other deadly drugs. It's reported that Fausto started his criminal career as an independent solo trafficker, bringing small loads across the border for quick cash. Although today, it's assumed that he is the leader of the Meza Flores cartel, with a massive drug route smuggling millions of dollars of drugs into the United States every single year. According to the FBI, the Meza Flores cartel is based out of Sinaloa, Mexico, and is primarily involved in the production, transportation, and distribution of these deadly drugs, meaning that they're pretty vertically integrated, but unfortunately in the worst way possible. Like any good alleged cartel boss, Fausto is not only wanted for drug charges, but he's also wanted for potential links to other insane crimes such as kidnapping, extortion, torture, and murder. It is believed that Fausto currently resides in Mexico, and he is considered armed and dangerous and an international flight risk. The charges that Fausto are currently facing are the following: conspiracy to manufacture and distribute 500 grams or more of methamphetamine, distribute 5 kilograms or more of cocaine, distribute 1 or more kilogram of heroin, and distribute 1,000 kilograms or more of marijuana for importation into the United States, use and possession of a firearm. Those charges are insane, and we're only just getting started. And if you happen to have any information about Fausto, the government is offering up to $5 million for any information that leads to the arrest and conviction of Fausto Meza Flores. That reward is massive, but I doubt it's the biggest one we're going to see on this list. Let's move on. Giovanni Vicente Mosquero Serrano. Giovanni was born on February 22nd, 1988. He is 37 years old, born in Venezuela, has black hair, brown eyes, and his height and weight are unknown. And he's also known as El Viejo. Giovanni was added extremely recently to the FBI's most wanted list, being added only a few months ago in June of 2025. Although with the list of charges I'm about to read you, it's no surprise he's on this list. Giovanni is currently being charged with international cocaine distribution conspiracy, international cocaine distribution, providing material support to a foreign terrorist organization conspiracy, and providing and attempting to provide material support to a foreign terrorist organization. Giovanni is the alleged senior leader of the Tren de Aragua transnational gang, a gang that has specifically been designated as a foreign terrorist organization by the United States government. This gang originated solely in Venezuela, but now has operations throughout all of Latin America and the United States. And the primary reason why Giovanni is on this list is because the gang that he is the alleged senior leader of is allegedly responsible for sending gang members into the United States to engage in drug trafficking, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, and other violent crimes. The hunt for Giovanni specifically is actually part of a broader movement in the United States known as Operation Take Back America, which is a DOJ-led campaign targeting cartels and violent gangs that are based in other countries but operating within the United States. And not only is there support from the FBI in this investigation, but there's also support from the DEA, CIA, and other international partners. As of today, it is believed that Giovanni is either in Colombia or Venezuela. And if you have any information that could lead to the conviction or arrest of Giovanni, the US government is offering $3 million for your information. Omar Alexander Cardenas. Omar was born on March 23rd, 1995, in Los Angeles, California. He is currently 30 years old, has dark brown hair and brown eyes, and is approximately 5'6" and roughly 250 to 300 pounds, which is an insane build. What's more insane are his crimes. On August 15th, 2019, Omar is alleged to have arrived at an open-air shopping center, walked directly up to the window of a barbershop, and fired several rounds into the barbershop via a semi-automatic pistol. And unfortunately, during the shooting, one man lost his life. Although, interestingly, according to the FBI, it's believed that Omar doesn't even know the man that he killed, meaning that he either shot someone he was not intending to kill, or this was simply a random act of violence, likely as part of a gang initiation. Fortunately, there is CCTV footage of Omar walking to the shopping center and slowly waddling away as well. Although, even with this video footage, he is still not been caught nearly 6 years later. According to the FBI, it is alleged that Omar is involved with the Pierce Street Gang in Los Angeles, and it's also believed that his street name is Dollar, likely short for Dollar Menu. In all seriousness though, Omar is currently facing the charges of unlawful flight to avoid prosecution and murder. And once again, according to the FBI, it is believed that he has also been involved with other violent crimes as well, further adding to the terror this man has caused. It is reported that Omar often has a beard and also sometimes wears thick prescription glasses. And the FBI also believes that Omar may be in Mexico but could possibly be anywhere in the United States. To me, it's still shocking that 6 years later, this man that killed somebody in broad daylight on camera is still free to this day. But it's for this reason that the FBI is currently offering $250,000 for any information that could lead to the arrest or conviction of Omar Alexander Cardenas. Alejandro Castillo. Alejandro, or Alex Castillo, was born on November 26, 1998, making him the youngest person on this list, being only 26 years old at the time of recording. He was born in Arizona, has black hair, brown eyes, is 5 feet 6 inches tall, and weighs approximately 180 to 190 pounds. Similar to Omar, Alejandro is wanted for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution and murder. But in case that wasn't crazy enough, the story behind it makes it even crazier. In August of 2016, Alejandro was working in a Shomar's restaurant in Charlotte, North Carolina. He worked at this restaurant with his current girlfriend Mia and his ex-girlfriend Sandy. At this time, Alejandro was 17, Mia was 19, and Sandy was 23. An investigation by the FBI and Charlotte police revealed that Alejandro actually borrowed and owed Sandy $1,000. Although this was a debt he never intended to repay. Phone records were able to confirm that on August 9th, 2016, Alejandro had contacted Sandy telling her that they should meet up so he can pay her the money he owed her. Sandy agreed to meet up with him and they met at a Quick Trip in Charlotte. And what happened next was genuinely disturbing. When the two met at the Quick Trip gas station, Alejandro quickly forced Sandy to take out all of the money she could out of an ATM, and then it's suspected that he took her car with her in it to a remote location where he took Sandy out of the vehicle, shot her, killing her instantly, dumped her body in the ditch, and then stole her car to flee the scene. 6 days later, on August 15th, Sandy's car was found at a bus station in Phoenix, Arizona, Alejandro's hometown. And only 1 day later, on August 16th, Alejandro was seen on CCTV footage crossing the Arizona-Mexico border on foot to unfortunately never be seen again. To add insult to injury, it was only hours between the time that Alejandro had passed into Mexico and the body of Sandy was finally discovered back in Charlotte. It is believed by the FBI that Alejandro is still hiding in Mexico and is possibly being protected by local authorities. To me, Honestly, it is just so heartbreaking how seemingly easily Alejandro was able to get away with this crime for this long. However, there is still hope that justice will finally be served. It is for that reason that the United States government is offering up to $250,000 for any information that could lead to the arrest or conviction of Alejandro Castillo. Wilver Villegas Palomino. Wilver was born in Colombia on October 21st, 1981, meaning he just celebrated his 44th birthday. He has brown eyes, black hair, and is believed to be 5'7" to 5'9" and roughly 190 pounds. And while Wilver may seem unassuming, his list of charges are nuts. Wilver is currently wanted for terrorism and international cocaine distribution. The FBI has confirmed that Wilver is a high-ranking member of the National Liberation Army, or ELN, and is wanted for his association with the drug trafficking activities of the ELN Northeastern Warfront, which is a region that stretches across Colombia and Venezuela. The ELN Northeastern Warfront oversees multiple laboratories that produce over 200 tons of cocaine every single year, and this product is distributed globally. And it's alleged that the massive profits from these drug operations go directly to funding domestic terrorism, political corruption, and even to subvert U.S. national security and law enforcement interests in the region in which he operates. Like most gangs and cartels, the ELN is not only associated with the production and distribution of drugs, but also with other crimes such as murder, extortion, torture, and kidnapping. That is all also in addition to funding political corruption and funding literal terrorism. The FBI not only recognizes ELN as a drug trafficking and a terrorist organization, but also as an army, specifically recruiting young men that are poor and have no other option, usually intimidating them with violence, making them feel like there are only two options in life of either being a poor victim or a rich, powerful member of their army. And unfortunately, for many individuals, the story that ELN is selling is appealing, and sadly, typically results in the tragic death of these young men who didn't know any better. The FBI is dedicated to bringing Wilver to justice after his multi-decade-long conspiracy, as well as his involvement in ELN's other operations, which is why, for that reason, he's been on this list since 2020, and the US government is currently offering up to $5 million for any information that leads to Wilver's arrest or conviction. But be warned, it should kind of go without saying, but Wilver is considered armed and dangerous. Bhadresh Kumar Patel. Bhadresh Kumar was born on May 15th, 1990 in India. He's currently 35 years old, is 5'9", and is approximately 165 pounds. He has brown hair and brown eyes, and he is wanted for the following crimes: unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, first-degree assault, second-degree assault, and dangerous weapon with intent to injure. The story of Bhadresh Kumar is extremely disturbing and also rings similar to the story we told of Alejandro, for reasons you'll see shortly. In 2015, Bhadresh Kumar and his newlywed wife moved from India to the United States, where they both lived and worked at a donut shop in Maryland. On April 12th of 2015, both Bhadresh Kumar and his wife were working the night shift together, and it was during this night shift when Bhadresh Kumar's wife, Palak, happened to take a phone call with her family where she expressed that she wanted to go back home to India. During this time as well, the FBI reported that Bhadresh Kumar and Palak's visas also expired, giving them good reason to visit home. However, Palak would never have the opportunity to visit home again. During Palak's phone call to her family, Bhadresh Kumar asked his wife to follow him into the back room of the donut shop, where he then allegedly stabbed her multiple times to death. And shockingly, as you can see, a lot of this encounter is captured on CCTV. At the time, Bhadresh Kumar was only 25 years old, and his wife was only 21. And after the horrific event took place, you can actually see Bhadresh Kumar walking casually out of the back as if nothing happened. Following this event, Bhadresh Kumar left the donut shop, went home, grabbed cash, his passport, and immediately went to a hotel where he stayed the night. He checked into the hotel at 3 a.m. and checked out at 10 a.m. And this was once again captured on CCTV. When Bhadresh Kumar left the hotel, he was driven by a taxi driver to Newark Penn Station, where he was never seen again. And after 2 years of searching with no success, the FBI decided to add Bhadresh Kumar to the FBI's 10 most wanted list. And since his addition in 2017, Bhadresh Kumar has remained on the list, and unfortunately, at large. The FBI is currently offering up to $250,000 for any information that leads to the arrest or conviction of Bhadresh Kumar, and he is considered to be armed and extremely dangerous. This case is another extremely heartbreaking and upsetting case because of how much evidence there is, however, how little progress has been made over the last decade. Ryan James' wedding. So far, we've talked about a lot of upsetting and disturbing and twisted cases, but this one is likely one of the most interesting because of the sheer twists and turns. Let me just get right into it. Ryan was born on September 14th, 1981 in Canada. He is 44 years old, has brown hair, blue eyes, and is roughly 6'3" and 240 pounds. And the list of charges against Ryan are long. Conspiracy to distribute and possess with intent to distribute controlled substances, conspiracy to export cocaine, continuing criminal enterprise, murder in connection with a continuing criminal enterprise and crime, attempting to commit murder in connection with a continuing criminal enterprise and crime. Yes, that was hard to say. Ryan also goes by El Jefe, and if he looks familiar, it might be because you've seen him on the literal Olympics. That's right, Ryan competed in the 2002 Winter Olympic Games in Salt Lake City and was an Olympic snowboarder. And I guess you could say he's technically still hitting the powder to this day. Now, jokes aside, going from being an Olympic athlete to then being the kingpin of an international smuggling ring is a pretty interesting career shift. However, Ryan's criminal career is nothing to gloat about. Ryan is alleged to not only run but participate in one of the largest drug trafficking operations that routinely ships hundreds of kilograms of cocaine from Colombia directly through Mexico, California, and even all the way to Canada, as well as other states in the United States. On top of running and operating an extremely sophisticated drug trafficking operation, Ryan is also alleged to have been involved in multiple murders linked to the furtherance of his drug crimes. It is suspected that Ryan has been involved in this operation for many years now. However, he was only added to the list extremely recently in March of 2025. Ryan is considered armed and dangerous, and as of today, the FBI is offering up to $10 million for any information that leads to the arrest or conviction of Ryan James Wedding. Ruja Ignatova. The crimes of Ruja Ignatova are definitely not excusable. However, she's going to seem like more or less of a palate cleanse in comparison to some of the other entries on this list. Ruja was born in Bulgaria on May 30th, 1980, making her 45 years old. She has brown eyes, black hair, and she is known as the crypto queen, and I think you can see where this is going. The current charges against Ruja are as follows: conspiracy to commit money laundering and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. In 2014, Ruja established her company OneCoin, which is a Bulgaria-based cryptocurrency company. And this OneCoin that her and her team developed was promoted as the Bitcoin killer and the cryptocurrency to rule them all. That's right, crypto scams have been going on for over a decade now. Feel old yet? Although Ruja's OneCoin was definitely one of the first major examples of blatant corruption and robbery. While Ruja positioned herself as a genius entrepreneur and positioned OneCoin as the future of cryptocurrency, OneCoin was created with one true intention in mind: to defraud people out of money. And it had no origin or no intention of ever being anything legitimate. With the early excitement of cryptocurrency rising in 2014, Ruja used inflated credentials and flashy marketing to take advantage of the market's interest and lack of knowledge. Without getting too deep into the weeds on cryptocurrency, the long and short of it is this. Bitcoin, for example, is a decentralized currency, meaning that everything that takes place on Bitcoin is tracked on-chain and publicly available to everybody. However, OneCoin operated on a private blockchain that was centralized, meaning that nothing was disclosed to the investor and everything that happened on-chain was basically owned and visible only to OneCoin. Due to the centralized nature of OneCoin, it allowed for easy and effective market manipulation, making it seem like OneCoin was much more successful than it actually was. And because of this, OneCoin was able to boast impressive numbers and gain investors quickly. However, what goes up must come down. Oh, and disgustingly, one of the marketing tactics they used was multi-level marketing, specifically requesting that all investors of OneCoin got their friends and family to also invest, which, as you can probably assume, led to a lot of people's financial misfortune. Only 2 years after the initial launch of OneCoin, in 2016, they held a massive event in London where Ruja herself spoke on stage in a magnificent red dress, talking about all the success that OneCoin has been able to achieve in such a short amount of time. It was at this event that Ruja specifically claimed that OneCoin had over 2 million active users and that OneCoin had the most active users out of any cryptocurrency ever at the time. And it was only within 1 year after this event took place that the entire house of cards fell. The result was $4 billion lost for investors and a global manhunt for Ruja. Ruja was officially charged with the crimes associated with OneCoin in 2017. And unfortunately, 2017 was the last time Ruja was ever seen, as she was spotted traveling from Sofia, Bulgaria to Athens, Greece. At the time of making this video, Ruja was the 11th woman ever to be added in its 75 years of existence. And today, the FBI is offering up to $5 million for any information that leads to the arrest or conviction of Ruja Ignatova. Yulan Adonai Archaga Cares. Yulan was born on February 13th, 1982 in Honduras. He is 5'5" and weighs 160 pounds and has black hair and brown eyes. And while this man may have a petite stature, his list of crimes is anything but small. Yulan is currently charged with the following crimes: racketeering conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, possession of machine guns, and conspiracy to possess machine guns. But his list of true crimes goes far beyond these charges. Yulan is the alleged leader of the infamous MS-13 gang for all of Honduras. MS-13 is an extremely dangerous transnational gang whose sole purpose is violence. MS-13 uses violent acts worldwide to support their prestige, enhance their reputation, and to control and grow its controlling territories. The FBI has stated themselves that they don't understand the end goal of MS-13, and they believe that MS-13's goal is to use fear to grow in power to then eventually grow into some sort of governmental entity. But that is still unconfirmed. With the fear and reputation of violence that MS-13 has, they're easily able to sell drugs and extort individuals in return for large sums of money to further fund their terroristic activity. And I don't use that term lightly. MS-13 is considered a terrorist organization in El Salvador, and is likely to be considered that in other places as well soon. With this brief explanation of what MS-13 is all about, it's not hard to understand why the leader of an entire division of this group is currently on the most wanted list. And the reason why America is so interested in Julian is because, once again, his operations closely involve violent acts that take place on American soil and the mass importation of illegal and deadly drugs onto American soil. Yulan has been on the FBI's most wanted list since 2021, and at the time of recording this video, he still remains at large. Which is why today the FBI is offering up to $5 million for any information that leads to the arrest or conviction of Julian Adonai Archaga Carreras. Although it is noted that Yulan should be considered armed and extremely dangerous. Cindy Rodriguez Singh. Off the bat, that is a name combination you do not hear often. Indian Mexican. Anyways, this lady was actually captured, which is a massive W, but I still want to mention her quickly, because she's technically still on the list. Cindy was born on January 30th, 1985 in Dallas, Texas. She has brown hair, brown eyes, is roughly 5'1" to 5'3", and weighs roughly 120 pounds. She's also the second woman in this video and the 12th woman ever to be on the FBI's most wanted list. Cindy was only added to the list in June of 2025, relatively recently. However, her crimes date back to 2022 when one of her children, her 6-year-old son, went missing. After lying to police that her child was with her biological father in Mexico, police began to get suspicious of what was actually going on, and Cindy was charged with the murder of her son. However, before Cindy could be arrested, her husband, and her 6 other children boarded a flight to India and were never seen again. While boarding this flight to India, it was confirmed that the missing child was not on this flight or seen anywhere at all. While the true circumstances and motivations behind this murder still remain a mystery, and the murder aspect is still alleged at this point, it is confirmed that in August of 2025, Cindy was caught and arrested in India, and has since been extradited back to the United States, where she is facing the following charges: unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, and capital murder of a person under 10 years of age. With this situation still ongoing, I truly hope that justice is served for the sake of this innocent young boy. Even though Cindy has been caught, the FBI is still offering up to $250,000 for anybody who has information that leads to the conviction of Cindy Rodriguez Singh. Now, even though that is the 10 most wanted list as of now, the video isn't over yet, because I want to give 4 quick updates on people that were on the list in my last video nearly a year ago that are no longer on the list. So let's quickly do a speed round. Vittel Innocent was on the list in my last video, but unfortunately it was removed from the most wanted list on July 1st, 2025. Now, this is upsetting simply because he wasn't caught and no criminal justice has been served. In case you're unfamiliar, Vittel Innocent is the leader of one of the most dangerous gangs in all of Haiti. And the gang that he operates is responsible for numerous murders of police officers, kidnappings of tourists and missionaries in Haiti, and other organized crime-related activities. Vittel Innocent is powerful and extremely dangerous. And unfortunately, he is still on the loose. According to the FBI, he was removed from the FBI's most wanted list because it was determined he no longer fit the criteria, and he was actually replaced with Rodriguez Singh, which I guess makes it a bit better because having Singh added to the list resulted in her being arrested only 2 months after being featured on the list, meaning that the list at least works sometimes. Alexis Flores was removed from the most wanted list on March 6th, 2025, once again, unfortunately, because it was determined he no longer fits the criteria. As a refresher, Alexis Flores is alleged to have murdered and assaulted a 5-year-old girl in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the year 2000. He was added to the list in 2007 and was removed only a few months ago in 2025. And unfortunately, this man is still on the loose 25 years later after committing such an atrocious crime. Donald Eugene Fields II was caught on January 25th, 2025, relatively recently, and he was on the list because of his involvement in child trafficking from 2013 to 2017. Donald was officially added to the FBI's most wanted list in 2023, and fortunately, he was caught only 2 years later. And finally, Arnaldo Jaimez was caught on January 30th, 2025, only 5 days after Donald was caught. Arnaldo was added to the list in May of 2019 after he brutally murdered his wife only hours after his wedding. He left her body in the bathtub of their apartment and then fled the scene and was never seen until January of 2025. And ladies and gentlemen, there we have it, the 2025 update of the FBI's most wanted list. If you guys enjoyed this video and would like annual updates, that's something I think I'd be down for. I know this video got pretty dark, so if you wanted to watch a video that was a bit more fun, check out the video on screen right now. It's a video about survival myths that would actually get you killed, so if you're interested in seeing the fun misadventures of 2 bros out on a survival mission, check out the video on screen. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and as always, trust me, bro.